Emily Carter never planned for her Thursday evening to feel confusing. But everything shifted the moment she received a short, simple message from her neighbor, Daniel Rivers, asking if she wanted to join him for dinner. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic, just a friendly invitation, but somehow it stirred something inside her that she couldn't ignore. She stared at her phone longer than necessary, her mind racing, because even though the words were casual, the timing hit a place she had been trying to keep quiet for months. Lately, the silence in her home felt heavier. Her husband, Mark, traveled constantly for work, and even when he was home, his mind was far away, locked inside emails, deadlines, and the never-ending projects he promised would eventually slow down, but never did. Emily didn't blame him. She just missed the simple feeling of being seen, heard, and cared for. She missed conversations that didn't revolve around schedules. She missed being someone's priority. So when Daniel, the neighbor who always greeted her with genuine warmth, reached out, the invitation felt like a small light in a dim routine she had grown used to. Daniel wasn't a stranger. She had known him for 3 years, ever since he moved into the house next door after his divorce. He was polite, calm, and steady in a way that made people feel comfortable around him. Whenever they talked, even if it was just for a few seconds in the driveway, he had a way of giving his full attention, something Emily hadn't felt in a long time. Still, she wasn't sure why her heart beat faster when she wrote back. Sure, what time? Maybe she was just flattered. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she had forgotten how good it felt when someone genuinely wanted her company. She tried to push those thoughts aside as she walked to her mirror, telling herself she was only freshening up out of politeness. But she knew she cared more than she should. She brushed her hair, changed her shirt twice, and then felt silly about it. It was only dinner with a neighbor. It shouldn't matter. She knew that. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she took even 10 minutes to feel presentable for anyone. Her life had become practical, routine, predictable. Maybe that was why the spark of something different, something simple, something human felt bigger than it should. She reminded herself over and over that she wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't seeking romance or drama. She wasn't trying to fill an emotional gap with someone else. She was just going to dinner. Just dinner. But even as she repeated that in her mind, she felt an uneasy flutter in her stomach. As she stepped outside, the evening air felt cooler than she expected, brushing against her skin and sharpening her senses. The short walk to Daniel's house gave her too much time to think, and her thoughts jumped from excitement to guilt to curiosity with every step she took. She wondered if Daniel invited her simply because he was lonely too. She wondered if he saw something in her that she didn't see in herself anymore. She wondered if she was being naive to think this evening would stay simple. When she reached his porch, she stopped for a second, her hand hovering over the door before she finally knocked. She didn't know why she hesitated, maybe because stepping inside felt like stepping into something she didn't fully understand yet. Maybe because she sensed that this night might change something inside her, even in a small way. The porch light glowed softly above her, casting faint shadows on the wooden boards, and she suddenly felt exposed, not physically, but emotionally, as though the act of accepting this invitation revealed a truth she had been avoiding. She was unhappy, and she hadn't admitted that out loud to anyone, not even to herself. Before she could take it back, the door opened, and Daniel stood there with the same warm, steady smile he always had. Nothing dramatic, nothing intense, just genuine kindness. "Emily," he said lightly, as though her presence truly meant something to him. "Come on in. I'm glad you could make it." His voice was calm, but inside her chest something softened and tightened at the same time. She stepped inside, and the quiet, cozy atmosphere of his home wrapped around her instantly. It wasn't the dinner she was nervous about. It was the feeling of being welcomed somewhere with intention, somewhere that didn't feel rushed or overlooked. She hadn't felt that in a long time. As he closed the door behind her, Emily realized she didn't know exactly what this evening would become, or what it would stir inside her. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This night would not be as simple as she had tried to convince herself. Something was shifting, and even though she couldn't name it yet, she felt it deep in her chest, a mix of curiosity, fear, and a strange sense of coming alive again. And as she walked toward the dining table Daniel had set with quiet care, one thought kept echoing through her mind, quick and uncontrollable. This dinner might turn out differently than I expected. Daniel opened the door wider, and as Emily stepped inside, she noticed how his home felt calm in a way hers hadn't felt in a long time. Soft music played in the background, something light and warm, and the small dining table near the window was set with simple dishes, roasted vegetables. Grilled chicken, nothing fancy, but clearly made with care. Daniel moved around the kitchen with an ease that made the space feel even more inviting. Emily felt her nerves loosening, but a strange tightness still stayed somewhere in her chest. The kind that appears when you're aware something matters more than it should. She sat down and he joined her with a quiet smile that felt both comforting and unsettling because of how genuine it was. They started with small topics, sharing quick, easy conversation work stories. The strange neighbor who always forgot trash day, how the weather in Portland changed faster than anyone could predict. But even in those light moments, Emily noticed how Daniel looked at her not with intensity. Not with expectation, but with true attention, something her life had been missing. He listened with focus, nodding, laughing softly at the right moments. And it made her realize how long it had been since someone really engaged with her words. Soon the simple talk faded, not because they forced it, but because the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like an open door inviting them to be honest. And honesty tends to find its way out when someone finally feels safe saying the things they've held inside. Emily didn't plan to share anything deep. Yet the longer she sat there, the more she felt her guard slipping. She found herself telling him how she'd been feeling like a guest in her own marriage. How Mark's long hours and constant travel left her living in a quiet house that didn't feel like a home anymore. She didn't speak with anger only, with a tired sadness she hadn't shown anyone. As she talked, she expected Daniel to look away, to get uncomfortable. But he didn't. His expression stayed soft, steady, and understanding in a way that surprised her. After she finished, he took a slow breath before speaking. "Loneliness can change people," he said gently. "You can be sitting right next to someone and still feel like there's a wall between you." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had lived through it. He told her briefly about his own marriage. How he and his ex-wife slowly drifted apart, not because of anger, but because they simply stopped meeting each other halfway. "The silence starts small," he said, his eyes lowered slightly. "And then one day you realize it's become the loudest part of your life." Emily felt those words sink into her. She felt seen in a way she hadn't expected. Not admired, not comforted, just understood. And being understood felt more powerful than anything else she had felt recently. She looked away to steady herself because the last thing she wanted was to mistake empathy for something more. But Daniel wasn't pushing boundaries. He wasn't trying to create something romantic or complicated. He was simply being honest, open, and human. And sometimes that alone is enough to make the ground shift beneath your feet. Dinner continued, but the air felt different now. Not heavy, not romantic, just emotionally clear. As if the conversation had peeled away the polite layer people normally keep between them. The way Daniel looked at her wasn't with desire, it was with a quiet respect, the kind that's rare and hard to find. At one moment, she caught him watching her thoughtfully, and she immediately glanced down at her plate, but not because she felt uncomfortable. It was because she felt something warm in her chest that she didn't know how to handle. After dinner, they moved their conversation to the living room, sitting across from each other near the soft glow of a small lamp. Emily talked about her fears, how she worried her marriage was slowly slipping into a place that couldn't be fixed. How she felt guilty for wanting more. Daniel listened without interruption, his silence not distancing but supportive. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "Wanting to feel valued doesn't make you a bad person," he said. "It makes you human." The sincerity in his tone made Emily's eyes sting. Not with tears, but with the realization that she had been denying her own needs for a long time. The longer they sat there, the more she felt the emotional pull, gentle, subtle, but undeniably there. She wasn't attracted to Daniel because he was her neighbor. She wasn't drawn to him because she wanted something romantic. She was drawn to the way he made her feel visible again, and that scared her. Because even though nothing inappropriate had happened, not a touch. Not a flirtatious word, Emily knew that emotional closeness could sometimes feel even more powerful than physical closeness. When she finally stood up to leave, it wasn't because she was uncomfortable, but because she felt too comfortable. And the ease between them made her aware that this connection, even if innocent, could become complicated if she didn't protect her heart. Daniel walked her to the door, keeping a respectful distance. But his expression? It held something unspoken, something quiet but real. Emily could feel it in the air between them, understanding that tonight had opened a door inside both of them, even if they didn't say it out loud. She reached for her coat and he stepped a little closer, not touching her, not leaning in, just standing near enough for her to feel the warmth of the moment. "Emily," he said softly, "I'm glad we talked tonight." She nodded, unsure of what her voice would do if she spoke. The silence stretched, gentle and heavy at the same time. She opened the door, stepping into the cool night air, her heart beating faster than she wanted it to. And as she walked home, she knew with every step that this dinner had changed something inside her, not in a reckless way, but in a deeply emotional one. Something she couldn't ignore anymore. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. This night had become more meaningful than she ever intended. Emily reached the door, her hand on the handle, when she felt Daniel step a little closer, enough to cross any line. Just enough for his presence to touch the air around her. His expression held a quiet conflict, like he was trying to choose the right words without letting his emotions slip through too much. "Emily," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her pause, a careful mix of concern and warmth. "I hope tonight didn't make things harder for you." For a moment she couldn't look at him, afraid he might see everything she was feeling, every confused thought, every lonely moment she had tried to bury, every piece of herself that had woken up tonight in his presence. "No," she said finally, her voice gentle but shaky. "You didn't make anything harder. I just wasn't prepared to feel this much." The words surprised her, but they were true, and saying them out loud made the air between them feel heavier, more real. Daniel took a small breath, the kind a person takes when trying to steady emotions they don't want to show too openly. "Emily, I never wanted to cause trouble in your life," he said. "I've always respected that you're married, and I still do." His honesty settled deep in her chest because he wasn't trying to pull her closer. And he wasn't pretending there wasn't a shift between them. He was simply acknowledging the truth neither of them could pretend wasn't there. Emily finally met his eyes, and what she saw wasn't desire or pressure, it was a deep, quiet empathy that made her heart ache. Her marriage wasn't broken, but it wasn't whole either. And tonight had only reminded her how many parts of herself she had silenced. "I know you respect it," she said softly, "and I'm not here looking for anything I shouldn't. I just connected with you tonight more than I expected." The honesty between them made the room feel warmer, and yet the warmth came with a gentle ache. Because even if nothing inappropriate had happened, the emotional closeness they had shared was powerful, and both of them felt it. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving her space, showing he understood. "You deserve to feel seen, Emily," he said, his voice steady but full of quiet meaning. "You deserve to feel like your presence matters." Sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. Because the truth was, she hadn't felt truly present in her own life for a long time. She had been going through routines, playing roles, surviving days. But tonight reminded her she was still someone with emotions, needs, depth. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't forgotten. She was still human. And that scared her more than anything. She looked away, blinking back the rush of feelings she didn't know how to contain. "I should go," she whispered, not because she wanted to leave, but because staying felt too easy to tempting. Not in a romantic sense, but in an emotional one. Staying meant letting herself feel something she didn't have the right to explore. Daniel nodded, but his expression held something like sadness and understanding mixed together. "I'll walk you out," he said gently. They moved toward the front door, the quiet footsteps echoing softly in the room. Their closeness stretching between them, but still respectful. When they reached the doorway, they both hesitated, standing in a silence that felt full of things neither dared to voice. Emily turned to him, and for a brief second their eyes locked a moment filled with unspoken truths. No touch, no closeness, no romantic gesture, but the emotional weight between them was undeniable. "Thank you for tonight," she murmured, her voice trembling just enough to reveal how deeply she meant it. Daniel's eyes softened. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "I know that wasn't easy." She nodded slowly, her heart heavy. The night air slipped in through the open door, cool against her skin, grounding her in reality she needed to return to. She stepped outside, feeling the distance grow the second she crossed the threshold. Daniel stayed at the doorway, watching her with an expression she knew she would remember longer than she should. She took a few steps before she heard him call her name. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft, honest echo in the evening. She turned back and he looked at her with a sincerity that felt like a gentle hand on her heart. "Emily, whatever you decide to do next, I hope it leads you to the happiness you've been missing." That sentence hit her harder than anything else he'd said all night. Not because it was romantic, but because it was true. It was a wish, not a request. A blessing, not a boundary crossed. It showed that he cared about her well-being, not about the outcome for himself. She stood there for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. Feeling something inside her shift, not toward him, but toward herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she needed to face her own life honestly. Not with excuses, not with silence. She finally whispered, "Thank you," and turned away. Walking toward her porch, the sound of her footsteps mixing with the quiet night. As she opened her own front door, the familiar silence of her home felt heavier than usual. It wasn't cold, it wasn't unfriendly, but it carried the truth she had been avoiding. She was lonely here, even though she wasn't alone. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and leaned against it for a moment, letting the emotions of the night settle inside her. Nothing had happened between her and Daniel, nothing inappropriate. Nothing she had to hide, but something inside her had awakened, and she couldn't pretend she didn't feel it. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring or what conversations waited for her. But she knew one thing with painful clarity. She could no longer ignore her own heart. And as she walked deeper into the quiet house, she felt the weight of a new truth this night had changed something. And whether she liked it or not, she would have to face it. Emily barely slept that night, turning from one side to the other as her mind replayed every moment from Daniel's home. Not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because the emotional clarity he gave her refused to fade. By morning, she felt a tired heaviness in her chest. It's the kind that comes when you know there's a truth you can no longer avoid. When Mark finally came home from his work trip, it was close to sunrise. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his tie loose. His gaze distant, so distant, Emily wondered how long it had been since he had truly looked at her. He kissed her cheek quickly, distracted, his mind already somewhere else, and collapsed onto the bed without noticing the ache in her eyes. That small moment, so normal, so familiar, hit her harder than anything. It showed her exactly how far they had drifted. And for the first time, instead of quietly accepting it, she felt a push inside her, a need to stop pretending that this distance was fine. So later that morning, when Mark woke up, Emily sat at the edge of the bed and gently told him, "We need to talk." Her voice was calm, not angry, not emotional, just honest. Mark looked confused at first, then worried, because he wasn't used to her starting difficult conversations. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, the house too quiet for what she was about to say. Emily told him everything she had been holding inside, not about Daniel, but about her loneliness, her pain, the way she felt invisible in their marriage, the long nights she spent waiting for him to see her again. She spoke quickly at first, then slower, her voice shaking when she admitted she didn't know how much more silence she could live with. She expected Mark to get defensive, or deny it, or blame work. But instead, something shifted in his expression. For the first time in years, he looked directly at her and truly listened. She watched the guilt form in his eyes, the realization hitting him like a wave. "I didn't see it. I didn't see you slipping away," he said, rubbing his face with both hands. "I thought I was doing all this for us. I thought you understood. I didn't realize how much I was losing in the process." Emily didn't want to hurt him, but she needed him to understand. She explained that she didn't want a perfect marriage, she only wanted a connected one. She wanted to feel like they were a team again, not two people simply sharing a house. Mark sighed deeply, and for a moment he looked small, vulnerable, and honest. "I've been afraid to slow down," he admitted. "Work became a place where I felt successful. Home reminded me of everything I was failing at. So I threw myself into the one place where I didn't feel lost." Emily had never heard him speak like that. His honesty softened something inside her, not fixing everything, but opening a door between them that had been closed for far too long. The conversation lasted hours. They didn't raise their voices, they didn't accuse, they didn't try to win. They simply truly talked for the first time in years. By the end of it, something in the air felt lighter. Not healed, not perfect, but hopeful. Mark reached for her hand slowly, as if afraid she would pull away. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "Tell me what needs to change, and I'll try." Emily squeezed his hand gently, a small but real sign of forgiveness. "We both have to try," she said. "Not just one of us, both." Later that afternoon, needing some air, Emily stepped outside and saw Daniel in his yard tending to his garden. He looked peaceful, unaware of the emotional storm she had been weathering. When he finally noticed her, he gave her a small, respectful smile, the kind that held no expectations, no pressure, only understanding. Emily walked over, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and sadness, because she knew the connection between them had sparked her courage to face the truth in her own life. "Hey," she said softly. "Hi," Daniel replied, setting down his gardening tools. "How are you holding up?" His question was simple but sincere. Emily took a breath before speaking. "I talked to Mark," she said. "Really talked. And it was difficult, but good, honest." Daniel nodded slowly, the warmth in his eyes showing pure support. "I'm glad," he said. "You deserve a marriage where you feel present, where you feel valued." She hesitated before adding with genuine emotion, "And thank you for listening that night. It helped me see things clearly." Daniel's smile carried something like relief. "I'm just glad you found your voice again," he said. "What you do with it is your path, not mine." Emily nodded, appreciating how gracefully he handled everything. There was no disappointment in his expression, no lingering hope, only respect and understanding. He had been a moment in her story, not a future she was meant to choose, and they both understood that. As she walked back toward her home, she felt a calmness settle over her, feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Her marriage still needed work, still needed patience, still needed honest effort. But for the first time in months, she saw a real possibility of healing. And she knew, deep inside, that sometimes life sends people to you not to stay, but to push you back toward the things you've forgotten to fight for. Daniel had been that reminder. Emily opened her front door, stepped inside, and felt a quiet sense of purpose. She wasn't running from her life anymore. She was returning to it with clarity, strength, and hope. And all because a simple dinner turned into a turning point she never expected.